Welcome. It looks like we've got a great turnout here. In fact, it's very gratifying to see all the folks that have showed up to figure out what we got going on in hydrogen. My name is Clifton Horace. I'm a local businessman, an entrepreneur, and a very long-time supporter and past chairman of Four Corners Economic Development. Am I too close to the mic? No. I'd like to thank New Mexico Gas Company and ConocoPhillips. Is Louis Salazar here? Is he? Thank you, Louis. We miss you. Welcome. For those of you who have not seen the first hydrogen breakfast, it is available online. Chris Hunter and Arvin have put together a heck of a presentation, and you can catch up on some of the things that you've missed here today. They've asked me to give you a little synopsis of what happened in the first hydrogen meeting. To me, hydrogen is fascinating. It's the smallest and lightest molecule in the periodic table. It is the most abundant element in the universe, and it was all formed 2 seconds after the Big Bang. I don't know how they figured that out. I took physics, but I might have been sleeping during that part. Hydrogen also has some unique properties when it comes to creating, storing, and transporting energy. It's been used to make everything from a hydrogen bomb to the Hindenburg airship. Neither of those will be discussed today. In today's scenario, with climate change, hydrogen offers the unique properties of combusting without creating carbon dioxide. In fact, when you burn hydrogen, you only get water. So if you're William Shatner and you're flying on Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin spaceship, the only thing it created was water. Hydrogen can also be combined chemically with oxygen to create electricity through no combustion in all of this. This is big in the automotive industry. No combustion at all through a known technology called fuel cells. It currently powers the space station. There's a company back east called Plug Power that's converting forklifts. They've done 40,000 of them. It's not new technology. It's tested and practiced, and it's making a good replacement. Hydrogen is also used extensively in industrial processes and would be used more if the cost would come down. So when you're listening today, we're listening for carbon dioxide and cost. The opportunities are boundless. You can create either mechanical or electrical energy without creating carbon dioxide. Scientists and governments and entrepreneurs have devoted millions and millions of dollars and tons of ink to the research and development in just this area. So you might be thinking, what's the problem? Hydrogen's perfect. Energy, no carbon dioxide. Let's be a hydrogen hub. The federal government's already made their decision and will provide over $8 billion to develop 4 hydrogen hubs in the United States. What is the problem? The problem is it's not in using the hydrogen, the problem is in making hydrogen. When you make hydrogen, you end up with a carbon footprint. Making it affordable enough is also the second challenge. And that's what we're going to be discussing today. Now is when you get into what we call the colors of hydrogen. So 80% of the hydrogen produced today is produced through a process called SMR, steam methane reformation. Okay? We're taking methane from whatever source it is, combining with water through a process, and from that process we're producing hydrogen. It's relatively simple and is by far the cheapest. Second type of hydrogen is blue hydrogen. Blue hydrogen is made through a process, the same process of steam reformation, okay, which uses methane or natural gas as its feedstock, but then has the carbon captured similar to what Enchant Energy intends to use at San Juan Generating. So in both cases, we're taking methane, we're producing hydrogen. In the case of blue hydrogen, we're pulling off through carbon capture the carbon dioxide. Third kind of hydrogen, and there's a lot more. For the purposes of today, we're going to kind of stick with the big 3, gray, blue, and green. Third kind of hydrogen is made from a process called electrolysis. This is where water is split using just electricity. Green hydrogen needs to be used electricities from renewable resources, specifically wind and solar. It uses water and is the most expensive by a factor of 5. If you want to use another source of energy, such as nuclear energy, hydrogen then turns into pink hydrogen. So just like people in politics, we've got all kinds of colors and shades. For the purposes of today's conversation, we're going to stick with gray, okay, blue, and green hydrogen. And we can move right into today's discussion. I've got some great panelists here. I'm going to introduce them individually as they come up so that you can, because some of their resumes are, all of their resumes rather, are very impressive. First up is Michael Moore. He's also pitch hitting for us for some state and federal officials that couldn't make it today. Mike serves as the program director for the United States Energy Association. Mike was the executive director of the North American Carbon Capture Storage Association in Washington, D.C. from 2008 to 2017. Over the past 30 years, Mike has been directly involved in domestic and international carbon monetization projects and related asset development. CO2, EOR, low carbon projects, CO2 storage and policy and regulatory issues, natural gas storage development, utilizing depleted oil and gas reserves. He spent considerable time on policy and regulatory issues in federal and state agencies. Interesting to me, in 2015, he was awarded the Royal Norwegian Order of Merit by His Majesty King Harold V with the rank of Knight First Class, an officer of the order. His work related to carbon capture, energy infrastructure, markets, and energy security were some of the positive attributes, as well as his involvement in Norway's recognition of the sovereignty of the Navajo Nation. Welcome, Michael Moore. He will be joining us. He's on the East Coast via, we've got him, thank you.
I am here, Clifton. Thank you for the introduction, and good morning, everyone. It's always fun to be the first content provider in the morning. It's a little earlier there than it is here. I'm up in D.C. And before I start, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, great. So nothing to add on what Clifton put in the bio there. But I've been around this stuff for quite a while, and as anybody that's been watching the news even the last 24 hours, everything's constantly changing. And there's more changes this morning when you turn your TV back on. Let's go I guess a little bit on the USCA. We do outreach work for the U.S. Department of Energy. We do outreach work for the State Department and for USAID, and both domestically and internationally. I, myself, am focused on the Department of Energy side of it. And it's a fascinating place to be. Washington is Washington, and I'll leave it at that. Can you go to the next slide, please? And this should be the hydrogen program. And Clifton, I think what I do is I turn this back over to you.
Okay. Yeah. What is the likely process the Department of Energy may follow for hydrogen hub applications?
All right. So on February 14th, the DOE announced a program. There's actually a couple of different programs at the same time that concerned hydrogen. These were a direct result of the bipartisan bill that was signed into law by the president. And one area we'll focus on is the request for information for the hydrogen hubs, the regional clean hydrogen hubs. So that RFI has been out there now since the 14th, and today, believe if unless they change something, the RFI responses are due in before midnight tonight at the Department of Energy. And they're looking for input from the industry, users, stakeholders, the financial sector, any of the active participants or expect to be active participants, or information providers or insight providers on the hydrogen hub concept and process. what the next slide, please. What the this on this slide, this is the other program about the manufacturing part. I'm not going to go into a lot of any detail on this particular one, but I think there's people in the audience, BayoTech and others, that are probably have a keen interest in how some of the second RFI is moving forward as well. Next slide, please. So what they're going to do is they've gone out to the marketplace to solicit a range of specific questions, 40 of them in all, 5 categories, and they basically want to understand how the industry works, how the siting works, how the equipment's manufactured, what's the marketplace look like, what's the market's expectations, a whole range of items, and I'm not going to read them off. These slides will be made available to you all if you don't have the copy of the RFI. And again, all this information that's being requested is all due in from the interested counterparties by midnight tonight. But there's one particular category that I'm going to highlight. So category 1, 2, 4, and 5 are typical kind of questions when you move it into a space that you want to develop into. But category 3 is new. This is the area of equity, environmental, and energy justice, EEJ, and their priorities. And this is going to be probably the one area where people are going to be, or responses are going to be looked at the closest. Everything else, they'll have technicians to validate the technical aspects. They'll have financial guys validate the financial stuff. There's a whole lot of components in 1, 2, 4, and 5 that are going to be easily assessed, routine, nothing unusual. But number 3 is unusual, in that this has not been a high-ranking qualifying component of a future FOA. So if you've responded to this, or you haven't yet, if you're involved and you've given that slight consideration as we've done in the past, it'll be a mistake. This will be the one area that the FOA will get the most attention on. So the people that have gotten time and effort spent in this area have created and have the experience and outreach capacity to understand and work in this new area. Highly likely you'll get into the qualifying rounds of when the FOA is issued and you compete for it, or you go after the funding, you get a good shot at it. I can't emphasize enough that that's probably one of the highest line item priorities in the new administration, everything it's doing, especially when they're handing money out, and especially in this particular case where they've got over $9 billion to aim at hydrogen hubs. Next slide, please. So what I've done, Clifton, I think I've just moved us into the next
fine. That's fine.
question.
Your timing's perfect. So the question is how may the timeline of the Department of Energy hydrogen hub application process potentially be affected by developments associated with Russia and Ukraine? By what implications may there be for the U.S. LNG production and export markets?
Right. So the slide you should have up in front of you is the Russia-Ukraine war and the sanctions. So 2 things are going on. Sanctions against Russia in all forms and fashion, both government and voluntary. There's a lot of companies that have voluntarily, without the sanctions specifically targeting them, have pulled out of Russia-related entities and activities. This morning, I believe it's official, I have to confirm it, but they for the United States, we will be banned from buying any kind of Russian petrochemicals, feedstocks, oil, natural gas, anything that we've been buying. And this chart gives you an idea what kind of products that we already bring into the U.S. You've heard a lot about it in the news about being an issue that we're sanctioning and trying to shut down a war. At the same time, we're funding the entity that's driving the war, and it kind of makes sense. One of the things that also happened in the last 24 hours is over on the London Metal Exchange, nickel is in a massive squeeze. It's jumped from $20,000 a ton to $80,000 a ton. They've shut the exchange down. Several Chinese entities are caught net short the nickel position. They're trying to assess just how bad the situation is. But nickel's a key ingredient for a heck of a lot of mechanical and petrochemical processes out there. It's a component in batteries. It's a component in steel, specialty steel. So a lot of crazy things are happening. The nickel squeeze could be a direct result of the sanctions. The timing's kind of coincidental. On the LNG side, we've got, somebody said, we've got plenty of gas in the world to supply Europe if we were to move gas from Russia away from Europe. The only problem is everything that can handle gas or move gas is max capacity when it comes to LNG. So it's not about having the gas to Europe. It's the infrastructure that's going to be required. We're maxed out in the arc of the Gulf Coast and the west and eastern seaboard on cargoes that can go to Europe. Also, you've got an issue with shipping capacity. There's other suppliers, of course, for LNG. But the bottom line is almost all systems globally have been at max capacity to service both the Asia markets and the European markets. Any new gas would have to be. It does not have to be. There's not a physical way to do it till you get more liquefaction facilities, more pipelines like in the U.S. to get it to the liquefaction facilities, more ships to carry it, and also more regasification facilities, say in Europe, to take the extra load of gas coming in. So if you're in Europe, it's tight now, and it's probably about ready to get worse. I think Russia, about 30 minutes ago, said they will likely turn the gas off to Europe now since the United States has put the sanctions on the oil. Next slide, please. So,
Mike, you got about a minute.
One of the things that happens with all this, and it's kind of a key piece, China has a huge role to play. So does Russia in a number of the different commodities. But if you look at this page, this is the NATO Energy Security Center of Excellence slide, that there's a long list of materials, special metals and materials that come out of China. And it's not because China has all those materials. It's because China will process all those materials into semi-finished or finished goods that nobody else will do. And they can do it cheaper than anybody else. So the raw materials mined all over the world, shipped to China, processed, and returned back as finished goods or semi-finished goods. Why is that? China's environmental rules and labor laws and all the other things that are associated with this kind of process are a lot different than they are, say, in the United States and Europe. What they do, we can't do here. In fact, the one mine that we have for rare earth elements, Mountain Pass, actually mines the raw material out. This is going on today, and ships it to China. The U.S. rare earth elements in its raw form. We mine it in California. We ship it to China. They give us a semi-finished product back, then we finish it back here in the United States. And why? Because of the environmental and legal and labor issues that we have to contend with, and for good reason, that the Chinese pay less attention to. I believe I am done. Thank
you. Your timing is perfect. I want to apologize in advance. I'm going to interrupt everybody at about a minute or so before they're done. Mr. Chris Hunter has been in charge of organizing this, and in his usual style, he's got 10 pounds of stuff in a 5-pound bag. So. Next up is Emelie Frojen. But they came back. Emelie joined San Juan Citizens Alliance in June of 2021. Born in Southern California, she earned a degree in environmental policy from Colorado College and a Juris Doctorate from Lewis and Clark Law School, completing a certificate in environmental and natural resource law, specializing in federal Indian law. Prior to joining San Juan Citizens Alliance, Emelie worked as a legal extern for the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Coalition and Earthrise Law Center, focusing on ecosystem resilience and dam operation in the Columbia River Basin. In her free time, Emelie enjoys whitewater kayaking, canyoneering, rock climbing, rock hounding, working in Durango's lapidary and silversmithing studio. Sounds like you're perfect for the Four Corners. Emelie, welcome. What are the environmental concerns of hydrogen produced from either water, through electrolysis, or natural gas, steam reformation?
Thanks, Cliff. I don't have a PowerPoint, but anyone is free to come up to me after, and I can provide some citations for my points, or you can email me at Emelie@sanjuancitizens.org. So one of the concerns that we have from the environmental side is the emissions from the source. So as we went over earlier, the majority of hydrogen produced globally is gray hydrogen without carbon capture and sequestration. And then prospectively in New Mexico would be blue hydrogen. And hydrogen is pretty emission intensive. So a recent study from Cornell University in 2021 showed that the greenhouse gas footprint of blue hydrogen is 20% greater than burning natural gas for coal or heat, and some 60% greater than burning diesel for heat. And the same goes with carbon capture and sequestration, and that's from the Journal of Applied Energy from a study in January of this year. We also kind of have some environmental concerns with carbon capture and sequestration coupled with blue hydrogen. So carbon capture and sequestration at a large scale has not been technically or economically viable. Looking at like Mississippi's Kempler plant, that project got tabled after running 3 years and $4 billion over budget. And the power utility provider in Mississippi has transferred that extra cost onto ratepayers. So that is something that we are concerned about. Additionally, congressional research from 2021 showed that incorporating carbon capture and sequestration into power plants can increase the energy demand by 20%. And additionally, the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council has stated that carbon capture and sequestration does not benefit environmental justice communities, which is a major focus of our nonprofit. Another kind of environmental concern we have about it is that hydrogen combustion for energy use has health and safety issues. Hydrogen energy can produce NOx emissions, which contributes to ozone and smog. Burning pure hydrogen would emit more than 6 times as much NOx as burning methane. Additionally, hydrogen is dangerous as an explosive. It's hard to contain and distribute through pipelines. So hydrogen is small, as we mentioned, colorless, odorless, highly flammable, and can pose a health and safety risk. That information is all from OSHA. Additionally, hydrogen being such a small molecule is much leakier than methane. So it is 100 times more potent than CO2 emissions over a 10-year period. Even with moderate hydrogen leakage, and even green hydrogen can increase near-term warming relative to fossil fuel counterparts. And that is from a very recent study out of the 3rd of February of 2022 this year. And while hydrogen is not a direct greenhouse gas, hydrogen reacts with hydroxyl in the atmosphere and breaks down methane in the atmosphere, which can accelerate methane pollution, which is a major greenhouse gas. There's also environmental issues with infrastructure regarding hydrogen. So aside from construction, we cannot use existing pipeline infrastructure to transport and deliver hydrogen. So pipelines that were designed to deliver, say, methane cannot carry meaningful volumes of hydrogen. The size and energy density makes hydrogen incompatible with generic pipeline materials. Hydrogen can cause embrittlement of pipelines in steel pipelines and higher flammability and leakage rates. And blending H2 into a natural gas pipeline has not been done at a commercial scale in the U.S. Additionally, New Mexico would have to invest significant infrastructure into hydrogen transportation. Also, retrofitting existing power plants is extremely costly. If you look at the cost of Escalante Power Plant from recent reporting, that will produce 164 megawatts of electricity, retrofitting for hydrogen, and costing $425 million. In return, it's going to create 110 permanent jobs. However, 164 megawatts of solar would only cost $328 million. So that's $97 million cheaper. And that's based on the Albuquerque Journal reporting. Then we also have an issue regarding green hydrogen. We have concerns about the water uses of it. So green hydrogen uses electrolysis of water, coupled with renewable energy, and it takes 61 pounds or 7.3 gallons of water to produce 1 pound of green hydrogen, and that produces 8 pounds of oxygen and 2.6 gallons of wastewater. So there's a significant water use in hydrogen, and that is of concern, especially in a state of New Mexico. And then we kind of have two other kind of questions, maybe that a couple of environmental concerns or things that we want to know more about is hydrogen's compliance with the Energy Transition Act is pretty vague. Also, the legal and liability gray areas regarding pore space with carbon capture and sequestration is also an area that needs development, I think, before we move forward. So that's, yeah.
Second question is, from the perspective of San Juan Citizens Alliance and like-minded environmental advocacy groups, what methods of hydrogen production and use would check all the boxes? Describe the perfect world.
Yeah, we are definitely open to decarbonization options for green hydrogen of ongoing industries. And we see it most applicable in two areas, in steel manufacturing and replacing current gray hydrogen for ammonia production. So hydrogen can be used pretty effectively in decarbonizing steel. So basically, you can use it, right? The biggest energy intensive part that would use hydrogen is removing the oxygen from the iron ore in steel production. And that we see that as the most direct application of hydrogen energy. And that's currently using carbon, but we're open to seeing that with hydrogen. But we do think that it should be done right at steel manufacturing plants because of the transportation issues of hydrogen that I mentioned earlier. And then the second most applicable method of hydrogen that we see is replacing gray hydrogen that's being used in ammonia fertilizer production with green hydrogen. So making that hydrogen better. And we also think checking all the boxes for us includes just increasing the research in hydrogen, as well as increasing the public input and education on the matter.
Thank you. Last question. Do you see a way to achieve the net zero CO2 emissions by 2050 as outlined in the Paris Climate Accord without using carbon sequestration to mitigate all forms of CO2 emissions, including agriculture, asphalt, cement manufacturing?
Yeah, so we see a big difference between applying carbon sequestration to existing sources of carbon compared to using it as a way to develop more emissions. So we definitely see applying and using carbon capture and sequestration at current facilities, such as asphalt and cement, so applying it to facilities that are already operating and already emitting that are hard to decarbonize. However, we do think that it's possible to achieve the zero CO2 emissions in the 2050 Paris Agreement without applying carbon sequestration to new sources and new development. So that is our kind of thoughts on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to head back to Mike Moore, who's pitch hitting for an environmental representative who could not make it. Do I call you Sir Mike Moore?
I'm here.
All right. Please characterize the Biden administration's approach to energy, and what are some of the major policy changes from the previous administration, and what are the implications?
Well, I think that there's a fast one that just recently came, was the shift in what the social cost of carbon was. The prior administration had taken the previous administration's number from, I don't remember what it was at the time, but I think that the administration took it down to like several dollars a ton. And one of the first moves that President Biden did in his series of executive orders was, I think it's like 13990, where the social cost of carbon was moved up to $51 a ton for CO2 and $1,550 a ton for methane. And I don't know what nitrous oxide was. They were supposed to, they'd set up an interagency working task force to assess the real impact, social costs of greenhouse gases from climate change impacts and what have you, and come back with another number by the end of February, which the sense on the street up here was it would be close to $100 a ton. We don't have enough time to go into why all that matters in terms of policy and development, but it is a major, that by itself is a major shift from the administration before. The other one is the previous administration had a keen desire to see domestic energy independence achieved with all of the above, with fossil fuels being one of them. Of course, a lot of work was going on, not by the administration, but by the ESG community and the carbon indexing and footprint work with firms to do things to lower their footprint. A lot of stuff was happening. That energy independence with fossil fuels as one of the primary drivers is not in this administration's focus, except for this morning. I believe that there's been a number of changes as a result of the sanctions on Russia and and what has been going on elsewhere around the world. That I believe, I think while we're talking, that they've just sanctioned Russian crude oil and products. UK just announced they're going to do the same. Markets are moving higher on oil, gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, all the above. And I'm not sure what they've done for the domestic piece, but they've certainly are making changes to allow the rest of the market to pick up the slack, and we just stay at current production capacity. The other one's going to be how the EPA runs its rules and regulations. A bunch of that, though, is being challenged in courts. There's a big one that's in front of us at the Supreme Court now about the actual authority of the EPA to actually have the authority to regulate greenhouse gases. And this goes back to Massachusetts versus EPA, where Massachusetts won under the Supreme Court that the EPA was sued to be responsible for the regulation of greenhouse gases. That's going to be a decision that comes up here shortly. It could have huge implications with or without this current administration. It's an old issue that's been percolating for a while. Anyway, we're in very, very unique times. They're not going to get less unique anytime soon. We're an energy-loving country. Everything we touch has an energy value to it or cost. And like everything, you can't have everything that you want, and you may have too much of something you don't need. So there'll be a lot of compromises in the interim until we get through these scenarios that we've been going through with COVID and with the Russian-Ukraine event. And I probably talked too much.
Thanks. Mike, what are some of the environmental impacts associated with renewable energy that we might not normally hear about, including associated CO2 impacts? In the interest of time, he's asking that you limit your response to electric vehicles, solar panels, and batteries. So
I guess there's inside the energy sector, inside any kind of sectors that we touch with our fingers. There's a budget of energy in there. There's effects and causes and what have you that take place. And so you try to take and look at an industry or a project or independent something operating, say, in the energy sector, and you want to do a life cycle analysis on it for, say, greenhouse gases. And the life cycle analysis is where you look at all the different aspects that go into the manufacturing and processing of something and see what kind of requirements it takes to end up with what you have in terms of energy, waste, emissions, all these things. And one of the big arguments out here in the market space for all of the above, not singling out any one particular area of energy, is what are the fence lines that you put around something when you do a life cycle analysis on it. So if I don't like fossil fuels, I go back to the guy that made the shovel that's going to be used to dig the hole, to put a charge in the ground to knock back loose the rock, to get to the coal, to load in the truck, and all the steel used in the truck to make the truck, and the fuel in the truck to get it to the site, to get it to process, the copper and the wires, the energy made to make all that. Well, you know what? That looks pretty bad. Now, if I look and if I like an electric car, I put the fence around the car, and I go, look at this. There's no CO2 emissions. But yet, all the materials in the car, the batteries, the processing, the overseas sourcing of the raw materials, I can go A through Z. If you want to do apples to apples, everybody's in for some surprises. Maybe not the ones that they expect. But the problem that is out there today, none of this is compared apples to apples. Every industry is as guilty as the other for putting its fence line around its area of interest in a way that gives it its best outcome. There's no standardizations in the LCA process. And as long as that is used as the marker or the benchmark or the way of showing things, we will have disparities in what are the true benefits and not benefits. I mean, today, nickel's at $80,000 a ton. How much do you think batteries in electric cars are going to cost at $80,000 a ton? It's a 250% increase just in nickel. And you have we've got like a 50% increase in base energy costs across globally now. So who knows? But if you put the box in a tight little space, you can come out with anything. One of the things in the world of modeling is all the modelers know one thing. You build a model knowing the data that you're going to put into it to come up with an output you'd like. In other words, you build your model to accommodate the data you're going to put in it, and you make the data fit the model you just built. So unless you're deep into the game with that, always is this trust but verify? Anyway, I'll leave it at that because everybody's got there's valid points in all the arguments. It depends on which table you sit at. At the end of the day, I really am going to be somewhat agnostic because at the end of the day, we'll have 7.5 billion people, and a lot of them have nothing at all like we enjoy. So their energy budget is going to move at a rate faster than we can make energy available to them at the capacity and availability that we and other Western countries enjoy. And so it's going to take all of the above, and it's going to be very hard to start singling everything out for particular purposes without being able to supply these expectations in front of us. And I, again, probably talk too much.
Thank you. Actually, that was interesting. You make statistics prove anything but the truth. Last question. Can you achieve net zero CO2 emissions by 2050 as outlined in the Paris Climate Accord without using carbon sequestration to mitigate all forms of CO2 emission?
Well, I mean, I'm in the middle of this CCS, CCUS world, have been for a long time. I've had a lot of time to look at the numbers and watch population growth and expectations in energy load and demand. And 2050 is, it's 27 years, 28 years from today. Roll the clock back 28 years from where we are now to where we were 28 years ago, and look at all the technological changes that took place just in that window in time. And it's only in the last 5 years has the, get to some kind of zero emission level kicked in. It's only been the last 24 months it's become a priority. It's only been the last 12 months that you've really seen some huge financial commitments made to get there. So, but things that we do today to try to get there tomorrow have to include all the above. I think we can get there, but we can't get there without CCS. We have base industries that inherently are going to have a CO2 or carbon emission. They're going to have a footprint, and you're going to have to do something to mitigate it on the greenhouse gas side because of climate change issues that the world's all agreed to do. That you're going to have to do that because of the size and scale that you can retire the CO2. I'm a betting man, and I'll bet that between now and 2050, we'll have some technologies emerging or have been deployed that we hadn't thought about today that'll have a huge impact on how we get to net zero by 2050. But today, where I sit, what I know, where I see, and the people I know and the people I have to interface with, both sides of the table, it will require CCS in some degree to get there.
Thank you. Next up is Mike Stark. Mike is a skilled government, strategic planning, community development, budgeting, public speaking, strong community and social service professional. Mike graduated with an MBA from the New Mexico Highlands University and a BBA from New Mexico State University. After all the San Juan County commissioners perform thoughtful deliberation and make a decision, they all turn to one guy. That's Mike. Get her done. Mike, what advantages does San Juan County and the surrounding areas offer to attract investor interest and jobs related to the hydrogen hub?
Well, thank you, Cliff, and thank you for that introduction that I had nothing to do with in terms of the bio. I appreciate that. So, you know, we put together a list, and myself and Mr. Trujillo will kind of cover this 7 advantages, and I would say 7 assets that San Juan County has to offer to attract outside capital investment and jobs, and that's always important to your local county government and making sure that we're keeping an eye on that. And so yes, number one, we are a community that embraces all forms of energy production, and that's important because we know we supply a lot of energy outside of our borders. That helps to maintain quality of life, not just here, but elsewhere for folks that rely on that energy. And when I say all forms, it's not just the current forms. Okay, so we have coal-fired power, oil and natural gas production, but we're seeing new developments taking place here and interest from folks wanting to put in pump storage hydro, solar projects, which I'll talk about here in a bit, and of course, great interest in seeing hydrogen produced here and taking advantage of that opportunity as technologies improve and the cost and reliability associated with these new forms of energy improve. So one of the really important measures for us is jobs. Jobs. So when you think about what's the energy economy in San Juan County, what has that done for us? Well, it's provided us great middle-class jobs, economic-based jobs. So these are jobs that are bringing dollars from elsewhere into our county. And that's really been the secret to our success here when you think about the vibrant economy and the quality of life that we've enjoyed here, is because of those great middle-class jobs. And you don't see those great middle-class jobs. We don't want to see them disappear. And so we want to make sure that, yes, we're paying close attention to the environment and the desire to want to see a decarbonized world, but that has to be a balance between protecting the environment and protecting people, our people here in San Juan County. That's really important. So, the jobs that, and I'll give you an example. Recently, the County Commission approved industrial revenue bonds for 2 of the solar projects associated with the Energy Transition Act. One was Photosol, a 300 megawatt project to be located northeast of San Juan Generating Station, 200 megawatts of solar, 100 megawatts of battery. And that project is going to provide upwards of $350 million of investment in San Juan County. And we are very thankful and appreciative of that. How many full-time jobs do you think it's going to produce? 10 full-time jobs. So we want to see and take advantage of those new forms of energy production here. We want to see that investment here. It's an all and above strategy, as Mr. Moore pointed out. That's we think important for San Juan County to continue to evolve and develop and see our economy continue on as it has in the past. So number one is really important, that we do embrace all forms, regardless if it's current or new technologies that emerge. We want to see those develop here, and knowing our role as an energy leader here locally and nationally. Number two, we're rich in natural gas and the potential for renewables development. Well, that's really important when we talk about, and we can talk about blue and green, right? Cliff, okay. So we have the ability to start producing affordable, reliable, that's always important when it comes to energy, right? It's got to be affordable and reliable, blue hydrogen. And as technologies improve, we have the ability here, because of lots of surplus sun, to transition that eventually as it becomes affordable and reliable to green hydrogen. And so we're the perfect place to actually get to a decarbonized world, allowing for the technologies and costs to come down through, improve and come down through time. And so that number 2 is really important when it comes to why we would be uniquely positioned to be a big player in hydrogen going forward, because we could start at blue and transition to green over time as things allow for that to develop. Number 3, pipelines and power lines. Those exist today because of oil and gas development, because of coal-fired power. That's great. We can utilize those existing pipelines and transmission lines, or existing corridors if hydrogen can't be accommodated through existing methane transmission lines, to produce that power here and ship it elsewhere. Clean, affordable, reliable power. Once again, like we've been producing for many, many years. The pipeline, and specifically the power line corridors, we know we have the bird's nest on the ground. And what I mean by that is it takes over 10 years today to see a transmission line permitted in the U.S. We have those stood up today and available. And of course, capacity is dwindling quickly here, because we have a lot of folks eyeing our corridor to access Western energy markets. In fact, recently we received a presentation from a renewable energy project in Union County. And where do you think the closest place for them to tie into the Western U.S. grid was? They had to run it all the way across the state over to San Juan Generating Station. So that just goes to show how we're uniquely positioned there to take advantage of that asset on the ground that we have today. Number 4, available land and subsurface CO2 storage. We've got lots of land, and it doesn't have to be private land. Only 6.5% of land in San Juan County is privately owned, but we have 65% owned by the Navajo Nation, 25% owned by the BLM. That's where a lot of these, well, the 2 solar installation projects that we're working on, the County Commission has approved IRBs for, are on those public land parcels. A small portion of private land on the Photosol one, but it's very small. But that's a great place for those types of projects to exist. That's a great place for oil and gas development. That's why you see a lot of that on federal land. So we've got that available, and it's an asset for sure, as we could potentially provide that blue to green transition. Subsurface CO2 storage. We have the geologic formations, and I'm by no means a certified geologist, but what I've been told is that this is perfect for this area to store CO2. In fact, New Mexico Tech is currently working with the Department of Energy and Enchant to drill a test sequestration well and develop that into a Class 6 well. And that could certainly serve as the model for how sequestration can be done, not just for that opportunity, but for hydrogen, to be able to store the CO2 that's produced from blue hydrogen and sequester it permanently in underground reservoirs. So those are the top 4, and then I think Mr. Trujillo was going to cover the next 3.
Thanks a lot, Mike. And again, am I on?
I don't think so. Try this one.
Great. Testing. Oh, there I go. I'm back on again. But again, looking at what we do have in terms of available workforce and the skilled labor that we have available, right now we have a lot of expertise in the trades in the region here. And to transition that to other industrial or technological-based jobs would be an easy transition. And San Juan College is positioning itself in order to be that training facility that would allow for that transition for displaced workers, and to find opportunities for our students that are coming up through the educational ranks right now. So again, really looking at our skilled workforce, we have the potential and capabilities of really bringing that to the forefront as we begin to identify what are those target industries that we want to focus on. And we've seen the ability to do that from the past as these power plants came on board, where the companies were able to come in and train Navajos to become skilled laborers and skilled workers and skilled operators at both the mines and the power plants. And so again, that coupled with the fact that we have a very supportive government throughout the region here. One of our jobs here with Four Corners Economic Development has been bringing our government entities together to look at this from a common goal. As Mike indicated, we're looking at jobs. We're looking at keeping our folks here, living here in the Four Corners area. The governments are very supportive of doing those things. This is home for many of us. And we want to continue to see this area thrive and prosper. And so again, the governments here are very supportive on looking at job development, looking at the different types of energy and the resources that we have available in order to generate or produce that energy and utilize the infrastructure that we have in place here. And again, we are also surrounded by tribes. And so how do we begin to build those relationships with our tribes? And again, I've been a part of the Navajo Nation, and we need to begin to really focus on how we can become better business partners. Because think about it, this region here is surrounded by $7 billion of ventured capital. Southern Utes have $3 billion in a growth fund. The Navajos have $3 billion, well now $4 billion in a permanent fund. The Lagunas and the Ute Mountain Utes have close to $1 billion in their growth funds. And so the question to ask is how much of that money is invested here in the Four Corners region? Very little, if not any. The Navajos send their money to New York City. In essence, the whole country uses Navajo money. The Southern Utes send their money to the Gulf states with their oil rigs and their investments there. The Lagunas send their money down the Rio Grande corridor. The Ute Mountain Utes look at investments in Arizona, California, even in the northwestern portions of the U.S. So what does that say about us? How do we begin to build those relationships and build those partnerships so that we can see added growth and bring those relationships into fold so that we all together can begin to prosper and develop? So those are some of the assets that both Mike and I see in this aspect.
Thank you very much, Arvin. Next up is Krista McWilliams. Filling in for Krista McWilliams, and I think we've got a slide for her, is John Byrom. He doesn't look like Krista, you can tell by his hair. John is Vice President of Business Development with Process Equipment and Service Company, which is a manufacturer of oil and gas, hydrogen, and once in a while water treatment processing equipment right here in Farmington, New Mexico. He's really smart. He holds a degree in mechanical engineering from either Texas Tech or Texas A&M, whichever one's better.
I think we all know which one is better.
Welcome, John Byrom.
Well, thank you, Cliff, and thank you to the audience for remaining seated and withholding your disappointment once you saw me sitting up here. You did notice Krista's her background slide. It is very impressive, I must say. And I will say that Lagos has been, when we talk about impact on communities, companies that are based here that have an impact and the involvement, that Lagos and Krista is a great example of somebody that cares about the community. You know, you look at what she's done, what she's doing, as well as her husband and her company. So we're very happy to have them, and I'm privileged to be able to kind of speak on her behalf. So go on to the next slide. So from a producer's perspective, first of all, Lagos is one of our larger independent producers here. For the most part, the majors have left. Lagos has come in and acquired a lot of that acreage. So they're one of the bigger companies here in Farmington at this point. And they have extensive acreage, and they've been part of the group that has really proven up the Mancos play as well as potential in the coal bed methane. So we have tremendous reserves here, and I just want to mention that. I've heard the stat, and I've said it before, but based on the reserves analysis in the Mancos, we have enough gas to produce out of the Mancos economically to match the volume of gas that we've produced out of the San Juan Basin since 1921 when we did the first well. So that's an incredible stat, and that's an incredible asset. And and Lagos is one of the companies that is bringing that to the fold. So the first item is, of course, the energy needs. I mean, the world needs energy and a lot of it. So obviously, the course of events over the last week have been horrific, and a wake-up call, a reminder of the kind of how tenuous a lot of the things that we take for granted as a society really are, and why you can't necessarily put all your eggs in one basket. And I think it's important that we remember that you have to have backup, you have to have reliability, and I think a big point is when we look at what happened in Texas here a couple of winters ago, what has happened in California, and what PNM is warning that can happen in New Mexico when we don't get our energy supply mix right. So I think that's a critical point that we all need to be keeping in mind. So natural gas feedstock to support hydrogen development would be good for San Juan Basin producers. So basically, if we're using hydrogen as part of the energy solution, and part of that generation of hydrogen comes from natural gas, obviously that helps San Juan gas producers, whether that consumption is here locally as we use that to make hydrogen, or whether we're supplying natural gas to other parts of the country where they're making hydrogen there on site. In any case, it increases demand for natural gas, which is good. The labor and infrastructure synergies, it's clear that when, I can speak for PESCO, we're building units for BayoTech, who will be speaking next, but those units are very close in the kind of design and operation that our folks that both in the manufacturing and operation are used to. So it's not a foreign technology. It's not something that is very new to us from the standpoint of producing it, operating plants. Obviously, we've been operating refineries and coal plants here for years, so we understand control systems and pressure vessels and flows and all of that this industry, the assets that we have. So it's definitely a very a good transition for this community to be getting into that. Additional hydrogen support infrastructure would benefit the oil and gas industry. So as we've talked about, rail is one of the focuses that we would like, as well as also potentially getting into petrochemicals. Hydrogen would also dovetail into that nicely, from the ability to be able to move things in and out, and to be able to potentially be a stepping stone to other industries that could be here. Carbon capture and sequestration for hydrogen development would also help environmentally conscious producers. So that's a big push here in the state of New Mexico. The governor and the state have pushed through new CO2 emissions, methane emissions limitations that are pretty strict. They've set a pretty high bar, and the producers here are rising to that challenge. So I know that companies are buying their own LiDAR systems to be able to, I guess it's not LiDAR, radar, but anyway, the infrared cameras, so they can be detecting leaks and coming up with different ways to make equipment and operate their wells to reduce that emissions to meet those targets. So I know Ms. Frojen certainly brought up some good points that need to be addressed, but I think as we work forward to reduce the emissions and make sure that we're not emitting methane, it's a doable challenge. So finally, produced water or carbon capture, I'll talk about that briefly. I know Mike already talked about how we've got a lot going on, and we certainly have once again, the technology to drill wells, to be able to case those wells, to ensure that they aren't leaking and to inject the CO2 into the formations, that dovetails extremely well with the existing industry that we have of drilling for oil and natural gas here. And finally, produced water from oil and gas could also help in the hydrogen development and reduce the consumption of other water sources. So, and that's an area that PESCO is working on, but there's other sources of where we can actually use the water that is produced along with oil and gas out of our wells that right now is either evaporated or disposed of back down into reservoirs, to be able to clean that up, to then have that be the source water for hydrogen generation. And that would provide another untapped water resource and not impede any of the uses of the current surface water that we have in the county.
Thank you, John. Do we have Wish online? Do we know he's, okay. Next speaker is
Hi,
Wish.
can you hear me?
Can you hear us, Wish?
Yeah.
Okay, great. First I got to introduce you with a little drum roll. Next speaker is Wish Krishnamoorthy. He's the Chief Technology Officer of BayoTech Hydrogen out of Albuquerque, New Mexico. Wish develops technology combining the disciplines of manufacturing, safety, health, and environment. He leads teams of engineers and researchers to meet business objectives in the energy and defense industries. He has a PhD and a master's in materials science and engineering from the University of Florida and a BS in metallurgy from the Indian Institute of Technology. Welcome, Wish. Wish, are there any demonstration projects using hydrogen underway in New Mexico that may be using BayoTech technology?
Yes, many opportunities, and the first one starting here. But before I start, are you guys very familiar with BayoTech and what we do?
No, go ahead and give us a brief
Hello?
explanation.
No, okay. So BayoTech essentially uses SMR technology, steam methane reforming that you heard before from Mike Moore. Same technology to make hydrogen from natural gas, okay? The difference is it is a distributed system, and so it's not a centralized system. That does two things. One is if you calculate the carbon intensity of delivered hydrogen and the cost of delivered hydrogen, a lot of the cost comes from transportation and a little bit of the CI comes from transportation. So by making it distributed, we can reduce the carbon footprint per kilo of hydrogen compared to a large plant with transportation. That's one. Second, we can make the cost much, much more palatable for people who want to use hydrogen. So you've heard earlier from a lot of people about, what is the true carbon intensity, the CO2 emissions, all of those kinds of things. If you go to the actual numbers and look at well-to-wheels, as what I mean by that is, raw materials all the way to utilization of hydrogen using, for example, green technology like electrolysis, okay, and gray technology meaning SMR, but electrolysis in this case being powered by, say, the California grid, which is about a 1/3 renewable penetration in it, okay? The SMR technology actually is about 30% less CI than delivered hydrogen from a electrolyzer plant. The difference only is because electrolysis is a very energy intensive process, and it's very hard to split a hydrogen molecule. A water molecule. So anyway, that's the basis as far as CI goes, and our goal is to take that CI score and reduce it significantly. So the goal is, right now, the CI score for an electrolysis system that is centralized is about 160 grams of CO2 per megajoule of hydrogen. Ours will do it at 120, okay? That is great. Once we make it blue, based on everybody who has carbon capture technologies and injection technologies, including the power required to convert, or capture the CO2, because you need compression equipment and stuff, the CI score on it drops down to about 40, okay? Our goal is to add biomethane into it, which is a carbon negative solution, and we can go down to potentially a negative 300 CI, okay? So it is a continual process. The way we look at it is our system will start with that 120 score and then start dropping as we start finding out, adapting technology. So it's a modular, distributed hydrogen system, and it is intended for creating a small hub and spoke in various areas to enable applications of hydrogen. Some applications of hydrogen may fly and some may not. Our thought process initially, and that's a good earlier point of whether you want to burn hydrogen or whether you want to use it in fuel cells or whatever. At this point, the best chance for using hydrogen is a replacement for diesel in transportation, in power generation equipment, and those are where we see the highest opportunities for reducing carbon emissions. And so that's the starting point, and that's the applications we are trying to impact. In doing so, others want to do it for other reasons, like New Mexico Gas wants to inject hydrogen into the grid and see what they can do. They'll start with a small test bed. That's what they want to do. So actually, coming back to the answer to your question now, the first test bed we will have, actually it's not a test bed, it is our unit, and New Mexico Gas is going to put it in their facility here in Albuquerque on Edith and Griegos, about a mile from our headquarters here in Albuquerque. And they will be putting that, it'll be a 1 ton system, 1 ton per day. And so it's a fair amount of hydrogen to do various things with it. So that's the starting point, and that's where we should be deploying that in the early fourth quarter of this year. We also have plans for hubs in a variety of locations. This year, the plans are for 3 to 4 hubs, and we are working out leases all over the country for that. The one in New Mexico is this one. The first one in New Mexico. The first one will be in New Mexico, and that's roughly October timeframe. In addition, we are looking at a lot of partnerships within New Mexico, potential projects to use biomethane in certain areas. We're talking to some people in Tucumcari and Belen to use biomethane and convert the biomethane to hydrogen. And we're also talking to a lot of people to capture flare gas and use it for hydrogen generation. Why that's interesting is, as you guys all know, being in the oil and gas, flare gas, capping is coming up here pretty soon, especially for small oil and gas producers. So we want to make it more palatable and economical for oil and gas producers to be able to both be environmentally conscious by capturing their flare gas, and, oh, by the way, if you can do that, we can convert it to hydrogen. Just to give you an idea, hydrogen in a vehicle, I'll stop with these numbers to leave it in your head. If you are diesel equivalent, okay, meaning in a car, not in today's diesel prices, by the way, I'm talking about generally. To fill a car is $30, say, okay? And it'll take 5 kilos to fill a car, okay, give you the mileage for it. So roughly you're talking about $6 a kilo, okay? At that point, you're diesel parity. You have diesel parity. 1 MMBTU of natural gas will make 5 kilos of hydrogen. That means 1 MMBTU of natural gas at diesel parity will make $30 of revenue. Okay? So, which is a lot different than the cost of 1 MMBTU of natural gas right now. That makes the flare gas very valuable. So it's not just being environmentally conscious, but, oh, by the way, why don't we make it a valuable product that can actually be, useful for cleaning up the environment? And that flare gas, because it's located in oil and gas facilities at the wells, the CO2 can be captured. The cost of making this thing, a rough estimate based on what we are looking at, is about $2, okay, a kilo. If you capture the CO2 based on everybody we've talked to, it's approximately another $1, okay? Assuming zero credits, assuming zero incentives, assuming the CO2 is even given away for zero or sequestered for zero, that's only $3. You go home with 100% profit, okay, for selling at $6. By the way, today hydrogen is selling for $12 to $15. So that is the value proposition of putting a small unit like this to make oil and gas work hand in hand with clean energy to do what we need to do. So, and by the way, in southern New Mexico alone, based on the emissions I've seen, we can make, just from flare gas, about 650 tons a day of hydrogen. That's a big deal. So that's the thought process, and therefore that's a lot of revenue right now being burned. So we are looking for projects in southern New Mexico. We're looking for projects in eastern New Mexico. And of course, projects, we're talking to Navajo Reservation actually for putting one of our units over there. So these are all various projects going on for different reasons and different applications. So
Thank
I'll
you.
stop with that. I think that gives you enough of a flavor of what we do.
Thank you, Wish. Appreciate that. Just by the way, we burn 122 million gallons of diesel a day in the United States. So, next up, if you have any questions, so I think we're going to have enough room for question and answer at the end of the session. If you want, grab a piece of paper and jot down your questions. We will also take them, we'll hand you a mic. Because we are recording this, we would ask that you not ask the question, George, without using a mic. So, anyways, if you have some questions, jot them down. We'll run them through Chris and get them up here. Next up, bringing back Mike Moore. Question on the table is, there's been a lot of pushback happened at the New Mexico State legislative session regarding standing up of New Mexico Hydrogen Hub. No less than 5 different bills were attempted, but all were rejected. The pushback related to NGO environmental groups who claim that Hydrogen Hub is being advanced solely to further support of oil and gas production. How do you think the U.S. will deal, how do you think the federal government will deal with the similar objections as they may be raised? Mike?
Well, Clifton, thanks again. And by the way, I never said this earlier, but to Steve and to Arvin and Chris and the gang there, thank you very much for having me out today over the way we're doing this, and appreciate the opportunity to interface with everyone. So you're kind of in a spot that I have a lot of interest in. It's not necessarily because of hydrogen, but the whole process. And let's take this down to a simple common denominator through the whole United States. We are the only country in the world where private citizens get to own the mineral rights under the surface rights of the land they may own that they have. They can take those mineral rights and they can separate them from the surface rights or from the land and sell them to somebody else to monetize. States that have minerals, and the federal government as well, have programs set up so that they can support the monetization of these resources to the benefit of the owner and, or in the case of federal lands, the U.S. citizens. Nowhere else in the world do we have this. So what does that mean? That means that if I've got certain resources on my land and I've had them assessed and I'm told they've got a certain value and there's certain things that we can do to do that, we have environmental rules and regulations to protect life and the environment around us, and a number of different things to safeguard how these things get done. It's not willy-nilly and crazy work that happens. And so I, as a mineral resource holder, it could be oil, it could be gas, it could be keratin type shale, it could be coal, any one of these fossil fuel based resources that with today's technology can be converted to hydrogen. And it can be natural gas. It can be green. I could have a lot of water rights that I have full control over that I might want to monetize with electrolyzers. But you can't monetize things unless there's an economic return on it. You don't do it to lose money because it's fun. And so there's a tremendous amount of work that takes place before projects are even stood up. So if you get to the place where projects make sense in particular geographic areas, that means a lot of things have aligned. There's rules, regulations, land ownership, mineral rights, political will, public will, and market demand for what it is that you're producing and you're trying to accomplish. You can't just go stick a chunk of metal in the ground and start producing something and do it without any regards to the rules, the regulations, and the policies of the area, the land, and the stuff that you're tied to. So before you even get to the point that you're putting one of these projects up in an area like the Four Corners area, all this stuff has been assessed. People won't fund things that can't go forward because the work hasn't been done. Ideas that don't make sense don't get funded. Ideas that break rules and regulations in a region can't get funded. And I can go down the list. And so we're at a point where we're at an inflection point for demand for energy and how we supply it in the United States. I don't think there's anybody out here that doesn't want clean air and a safe living environment to be protected from things that are harmful and stop anything that's detrimental to our health and security and safety. But there's certainly a lot of interests that are protective of their ideas at the expense of those around them. And I would say that you have, and I'm going to advance to the slide about a CO2 economy. So rather than say you got a hydrogen economy, you've got a CO2 economy. You are in the Four Corners region. You're blessed with a lot of sunshine, a lot of coal, a lot of oil, a lot of gas, and there's another one that's coming on the horizon, and that is the conversion of municipal waste, especially waste plastics, into a synthesis feed stream that can go to hydrogen production. And CO2 comes off of it, and some other stuff is municipal. And by the way, there's technologies that work for all of the above, and electrolyzing as well. Keys cost. In the case of things that emit CO2, there's all kinds of capture technologies that actually work. The example given for Kemper was a good example of things that didn't work the way they should have worked. The plant actually ran, and it actually produced electricity and captured CO2, and it went and did what it was supposed to do. But the cost of natural gas was substantially lower than the cost of the coal and the cost of the technology to convert it. So it's going to be in the history books going forward. But that doesn't mean that areas like Four Corners can't employ new technologies, over-the-horizon technologies that can come and improve. So your area also, and it has been mentioned before, has access to geologic storage. We've done storage in the North Sea in the Sleipner Field for decades, millions of tons of CO2. We've done CO2 storage in Canada at the Weyburn Field for decades. Lots of research. The Department of Energy is funding Carbon Safe. These are large regional CO2 storage development sites with the attendant research and monitoring and applications of technology, specifically to take CO2 that's going to come from industrial processes. And by the way, CO2 doesn't have to come from power generation. There's about 20 different industrial processes that happen to have a CO2 footprint that the newer technologies are making it more likely to have happen. If you got geology like New Mexico's got in that Four Corners area, or access to a pipeline like the Kinder Morgan pipeline that runs from McElmo Dome, Colorado, down to the Permian Basin, where there's a phenomenal amount of storage capacity without oil production in the intervals with brine in these fields where existing infrastructure reside. So I appreciate pushback, and why 5 bills failed is usually there's probably good stories for each one of them. Politics is one thing, the project's something else. So don't know, won't speculate. The fact that it was attempted 5 times is very telling about the interest to get it done in New Mexico. There's a lot of resource required for somebody to table legislation and to get it on the agenda. So probably number 6 is the charm. So back again, CO2 storage in your area is a big supporting precursor to hydrogen production in your area. And if you can produce hydrogen and you can sequester the CO2, then guess what? You can monetize resources that are right now maybe not being monetized. And I know of a number of instances where there's some very, very well-defined, very large resource bases that right now are valued at 0 because they can't take them to any kind of market. Hydrogen takes that the next step up, and everybody benefits. The landowner benefits, the state benefits. There's the people that are employed in the work of making all these things happen, pay taxes. They buy goods and services from the industries around them who pay taxes. They bring other jobs to a region that to support the activities around these large facilities. So it's do it right, run the rules and regulations, and this is America. You don't like something, you're perfectly entitled to go try to make a change. And if you got enough people that believe in you making that change, then you can change things. So, you know, if the world overall says no to everything, then I guess it's no to everything. But right now, last I checked, a lot of these things are being done elsewhere. They're doable here. The technology's evolving, getting better. And the other thing that's for sure is that we have a growing energy demand, and we got about 3 billion more people popping up the next 30 years. So, you know, you got to make all the above work. And New Mexico, in that area, in the Four Corners area, have a lot of the attributes. And you've got people there that have been around there for a long time. You know, Navajo and others who have some of these resources, hoping that could make all the difference in the world if they're monetized in a clean, efficient, and environmentally sound way. It can be life and game changers for these folks. Food for thought, and I'm done.
Great, thank you very much. Last but not least, Arvin Trujillo, our very own Chief Executive Officer of Four Corners Economic Development. Prior to that, he was the Senior Mining Engineer at BHP for 9 years. After that, he was the Executive Director, Division of Natural Resources for the Navajo Nation, spent 11 years there. And then subsequent to that, he was the manager of APS, Four Corners Power Plant Government Relations, for 8 years, and then we stole him. Arvin has a degree in mining and mineral engineering. What is Forset doing to promote developing a hydrogen hub in San Juan County? And how do I continue to stay informed about developments in this emerging energy technology market?
Thank you, Clifton, and I want to thank everybody for coming and sharing this time with us, and I want to thank the speakers here and those that joined us by phone. Again, what are we doing to promote this type of development? Exactly what you're seeing right now. Beginning to educate our community as to what this new hydrogen economy is all about. We have infrastructure in place. We have power plants, we have pipelines, we have support industries that could retool, redevelop, looking at business retention and expansion. We're looking at recruitment. The big thing that we're doing right now is building coalitions, whether it be between communities or San Juan County and tribes. The idea here is to begin to look at this as a regional effort. And that's what we want to do in terms of promoting this new opportunity. We don't know where this will lead us. But again, this is an option for each and every one of us. We've been blessed by the fact that we had coal development, oil and gas development the past 50, 60 years. That is all changing now. What's that next option for us here in San Juan County? Because again, we're looking at things from a Four Corners perspective. We, along with our neighbors in Southwest Colorado, Northeast Arizona, Southeast Utah, we compete with our neighboring metropolitan areas. So in many cases, we're the orphans over here in the corners, but we've developed our own economy here in the Four Corners region. And so looking at this, how do we bring attention to this region? Looking at the formation of the new Western States hydrogen hub, and how do we coordinate that? Not only with the 4 states, but within the state here, with the tribes. How do we bring that aspect in? And then how do we really begin to help you understand? Because the goal here is not to force anybody to move in one direction or another, but to bring people together to begin to discuss. There are a lot of different concerns. There are a lot of different issues. There are a lot of different things that we need to take a look at as it affects our community, as it affects our environment, as it affects our economy. And as we begin to look at that, understanding those issues and having discussions on how do we best mitigate these areas and how do we begin to propel ourselves to that next level. And so that's what we want to do in terms of promoting what we have here at San Juan County. And looking at that last question, in terms of how can we stay informed? On the screen here, you see on our website, these economic development briefings are all taped or recorded. You can click on those and you'll see the full recordings. And in fact, this last one, we've even broke it down in chapters. You can see the different questions that were asked. We broke it down so you don't have time to listen to the whole video. You can click on the different areas that you want to listen to, and you'll get the information. But what we're wanting to do is use this type of forum in order to educate folks and keep people informed. Go to our website, join our newsletter, subscribe to it. That's the best way you're going to be able to get information as to what's happening. These types of briefings will be continuing on a quarterly basis. We're going to be looking at how we can begin to bring new development here into the region. And more importantly, how can you get involved? Because this is about all of us. This is about us coming together as a community, as the Four Corners community, and working together, both tribal and non-tribal. We break down those barriers. I want to demilitarize the San Juan River. What do I mean by that? You go south and west of the river, people turn this way and say, that's the county. We don't bother with the county. You come on this side of the river, that's the Navajo Nation. We don't relate to the Navajo Nation. We need to come together now and see what we need to do to help each other benefit as we look at this hydrogen initiative. As we look at other initiatives, we're bringing broadband. We want to bring broadband to the area. We want to bring a railroad to the area. We're looking at big infrastructure items. And people begin to ask me, how do you keep informed about these? It's through the newsletter. Because think about it. Our biggest economic drivers are going to be going away. The 2 power plants. As those power plants go, the mines go. And so what do we have to replace that? And so again, those are some of the things that we're looking at as we move forward. On the table you have cards. Please join us. Things like this, unfortunately or fortunately, takes money. And we need your assistance, we need your help as we move forward with this effort. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Arvin. That brings us to the end of our program. We have time for some questions. I've saved George the trouble of shouting from across the room. We are recording it, so we would ask that you, if you'd like to raise your hand, we'll bring you a mic, and then you can share with us. Let me just, so we've got a couple of questions. That's great. I'll start with George's question. This is for Joe Marino. How many megawatt is the generation plant planned for in San Juan County? And from efficiency cost standpoint, doesn't it make more sense to generate electricity directly from methane with carbon capture rather than generate with blue H2?
Sure. My mic on?
Yeah, you're not on.
Hello? Okay. So, the way the power market works these days is you can't really stand up a plant with a fixed megawatt percentage and say that's what we're going to do, right? Every RFP, all source RFP comes out from a utility, and you have to fit your capacity and your pricing and your other project attributes into what they're asking for. And what you've seen over the past, 8 years that we've been up here is the amount of capacity that's requested by the utilities related to gas is declining sharply. It used to be in the hundreds of megawatts, it's now in the tens of megawatts, right? Solar plus storage is probably the dominant resource in the competitive resource in the region right now, and wind in certain places, particularly central and eastern New Mexico. From a comparing natural gas with CCS on with a natural gas or a turbine-based plant using natural gas and CCS versus a turbine place using hydrogen, I don't want to be critical of other projects in the community and other things people are trying, but there is one that I know of, feed study, which is a study being done on a natural gas plant with a CCS, which is just announced in, I believe, Alabama with Southern Company Utility, and our friends at GE and Kiewit are working on that feed study. So there is not really, our private equity investors have invested in a project that is putting a CCS unit on an existing combined cycle facility in West Texas. It's just not very mainstream at this point, is what I would say. It's something that would require a utility to say, or a large entity of its own who can kind of keep it all within its own sort of books and everything, say, we're going to try this and maybe it'll work, right? And I'm not trying to be critical of other projects, but so that's what you see in the market. When you go to someone and say, okay, we can do this, we can put CCS on it, they won't really score that. The utility today won't really score that as like, an advantage. They'll be like, well, we're not in the market for that. What can you do with just straight gas? And the answer is that it's much smaller, right? And it operates for much fewer operating hours. So that moves you out of natural gas combined cycle into a peaking application, smaller capacity, where the prospect of using a higher cost fuel like hydrogen becomes much more realistic. This might be a stretch of word, but becomes a path forward. Because one thing to keep in mind is that contemporary CCS systems that I'm aware of for a power plant have to run kind of at a high utilization rate. You have to run them a long time, right? So that means you have to run the power plant like for long periods of time, like 80% of the time or 90% of the time. You can't really turn it off easily. And what you see in the Western power grid now is that nothing beats solar during the day. Nothing, not even close, right? So the utility has to buy the solar because it's cheaper, it's reliable at this point. Wind is similar. It's more malleable because it's flexible, but no turbine-based system can match those renewables from an economic standpoint or a reliability standpoint when the renewables are operating. So you have to have a turbine-based system that turns on and off. That's not very compatible with current CCS technology that we're aware of. So you don't really see CCS being applied to peaking gas units. It's not currently in the mix, if that addresses your question.
Very interesting, thank you. We have a, how big,
Yeah, it depends on the RFP. So we have models from 900 megawatts down to 40 megawatts. It depends on what the utility is looking for.
Well, I think you're at the end of your time, so I'll be as brief and deep as I possibly can. My name is Leonard Martinez from New Mexico State University. I want to build a little bit on some things that Mr. Trujillo said. Many of you know, the governor signed an MOU with 3 other states to pursue one of the hydrogen hubs with Colorado, New Mexico, Wyoming, and Utah. So we reached into this area here, and New Mexico State University and this region have been invited to participate in the RFI. What the community should know is that there is a tremendous asset here at San Juan Community College. You all know it. They gave up their weekend, last weekend, as did Arvin, to respond to the RFI, and we were able to put in everything we've talked about here as an asset that should be included in the RFI. New news, it's really hot off the press. They're going to extend that date from tonight at midnight to March 21st. We'll be meeting with local leaders here. We have our contact to that group, Dr. Luis Cifuentes and Dr. Patricia Sullivan. They're here to kind of continue to collect input and move that RFI forward with the input from this community. So brief and deep, I'm done.
thank you very much, because that is very integral. I don't know if everyone heard him, but you have 4 governors of 4 different states have signed up to become the hydrogen hub, okay? That means 8 senators that you bring to bear, which is very powerful. Do we have any other questions? Gentleman over here.
I want to thank Emelie for her comments. She made one of the best arguments I've ever heard for us to continue to produce and use natural gas as a fuel. That was great. Question I have is about the salaries with these jobs for the hydrogen generating places and the other alternative energy. In the oil and gas industry, we got people, just high school education, making $60,000, $80,000 a year with great benefits. They get a company vehicle. If they go on, they can make well over $100,000 a year when they become team leaders. Are these other jobs you're talking about, the hydrogen plants and solar plants, even close to that?
Yeah, I think the analogy to oil and gas is a good one. They're very similar.
They're making $80,000 a year working
Some of them
solar
would be,
plants?
they're the same jobs, basically. You probably need more different safety training working with hydrogen systems as opposed to gas systems or oil systems, but it's not, they're very similar.
Anyone else? Ruben, I'm sorry, we'll get you a microphone. Just a little housekeeping items. Four Corners Economic Development's on a budget. If you throw your name tag in the bucket on the way out, then we can reuse them.
Raise your hand. They're looking for you.
Reuse them. The other way is that if you do go to Four Corners Economic Development website, a pop-up shows up where you can put yourself on the email list and stay a little bit better informed. These guys have worked very hard on the website, and the newsletter is absolutely worth your time. So you have the floor.
Yeah, my name is Ruben Fragoso. My experience has been in manufacturing, supply chain, and logistics. And I can't help but to think, in my experience, you have to be close to, in manufacturing, or in production of anything, you either have to be close to the demand or close to the supply. So Four Corners area obviously has the supply to produce hydrogen. But what we heard today is that it is difficult to transport. And San Juan and this region does not have the infrastructure to get it out. So is the plan to become a hub to supply to the rest of the nation or the Southwest? And so what steps are you making? Arvin mentioned the infrastructure, and we don't have rail, and we don't have maybe one road out of the region. So it should make more sense to produce or to take the gas, natural gas necessary to make the hydrogen, take it somewhere else where their hub is more feasible to actually manufacture the hydrogen for distribution. Just playing devil's advocate.
Anybody care to take? If I can just interject, I have a little familiarity with this myself. So, and everybody's been talking. I haven't got a chance. You're exactly right. There's supply and the demand. We certainly have the supply. And Joe referenced it, probably the best opportunity with hydrogen is to replace diesel. Okay, we already have an infrastructure that moves fuel gases out of the area. We also have an infrastructure that handles propane, and that distribution system is very similar. And so not only is the demand, but the demand is also distributed. So if you're looking at the I-40 corridor and you want to power fuel cell over-the-road tractors, the way you do it is it would be similar to a propane carrier. You bring the power to wherever the fueling station is. So while initially a lot of folks say, well, the demand and the supply need to be together, we have for 60 years distributed our energy via pipelines, electrical power lines, and just regular tanker trucks. So the other key is that we have the ability to sequester the CO2 here. Sorry for stealing your thunder. Anybody else would like to add?
Good answer.
Yeah, 122 million gallons a day in diesel, huge opportunity.
But again, one thing that we're looking at too, Ruben, is how do we begin to build the necessary infrastructure so we can we can manufacture the value-added product here. That's what's been missing. We've forever have been the exporter of raw materials. And the raw materials go somewhere else, and we end up buying the value-added product back here again. Why can't we begin to find ways so that we produce that value-added product and ship that value-added product out? as we produce the necessary products and utilize our natural resources. So that's what we're looking at right now, and that's what I'm pushing a number of tribes to also do, because they talk about economic development. And so again, looking at how we move away from that passive ownership model to a different model, that's the key that I see as we begin to move forward, and at the end, build sustainability for this whole region here. Because, you know, I look at it from another point of view. I worked hard.
You are the last party in the conference.
There's my signal. But in closing, you know, I worked hard. I got my kids through college. They're doing well, except one lives in Portland, Oregon. I got another one that lives in Denver, Colorado, and I got another one that lives in Baltimore, Maryland. I would like them here. And that's like that with many of the families here who would like to see their children to come back here. There are a lot of Navajo families that are looking at wanting their kids to come back and contribute towards the Navajo Nation. So that's the thing that we're focused on.
Cliff.
Very good. We have one last question, and then we'd like to thank the presenters.
It's more of a comment, an observation than a question. I do applaud everybody that has brought this together. This is great, very informative. But I'm Bob Fitz. I'm Vice President of Four Corners Home for Children. And everything we're talking about here and this conflict nationally, internationally, we have climate change versus energy and whatever. There's a lot of people paying a price for that. In the Four Corners area, we are seeing families disintegrate. Lower income, middle income families, they can't find housing. Building costs have gone up extraordinarily high. There is no affordable housing any longer. We're going to build another children's home. That cost for a reduced size facility has more than doubled in the last 20 years. A lot of that is environmental codes. Boulder, Colorado, the county of Boulder just passed a new set of building codes for net zero carbon imprint. The cost of a new home has increased by $155 a square foot. We know it's happening at the gas pump. A lot of people are being severely damaged by this. And what I'm asking of all of us is that going forward, we need to compromise. We need to protect the environment, but we need jobs. We need to protect the children that are coming up. Their lives are being destroyed in a lot of areas right now. They're turning to drugs. They're turning to things you can't even imagine. But that's the reality of what we're talking about. This is great. And again, I applaud everybody involved in it. But that is a consideration we as a society needs to take note of. Thank you.
Thank you for your thoughts. It's probably a good note to end on. I'd like to, if we could give a round of applause to the people that came down and sat at the panel. We appreciate your attendance, and we hope that you all learned something. It's a complicated subject, and the better off we're informed, the better decisions we'll all make. Enjoy the day.